We're going to have to leave it there. We could chat for another hour on this. Milo, Doctor, thank you both very much indeed for joining us here on Sky News. We'll continue this discussion on Twitter. Women should not be in a science lab because they cry and fall in love, says a septuagenarian biochemist. What do you think? You can find out what my guests think on Twitter as well. Dr Emily Grossman at Nero. Send us your thoughts at Kboli if you would like to.
On the 10th of June 2015, science educator and broadcaster Dr Emily Grossman witnessed a torrent of misogynistic abuse being directed at her after a debate about sexism in science on Sky News. The incident was subsequently highlighted by Yvette Cooper's Reclaim the Internet campaign as an example of a behavioural phenomenon called dogpiling, which it is suggested her debate opponent must take some responsibility for inciting. This video will consider the phenomenon of online dogpiling by examining the incident experienced by Dr Grossman and by comparing it to a similar and related dogpiling incident which Dr Grossman herself enthusiastically participated in. A term that has for many years been associated with jubilant North American sports teams has in recent years developed a second, more sinister meaning relating to the harassment and abuse of individuals on public online forums, and has led to members of Parliament calling for action to address it.
The thing that I think where platforms need to work together and where there needs to be tech solutions and criminal justice solutions all working together is specifically around the issue of dogpiling, which I met with Twitter to talk about this week. So dogpiling attacks are basically when there is a call out by a troll or free speecher to basically get their colleagues, their followers to all pile in and say the same sort of thing to you.
In 2017, when Yvette Cooper's Reclaim the Internet campaign wrote to Twitter demanding answers about the type of action they were taking to protect their more vulnerable users, dogpiling was one of 6 issues that they pressed them on. The difficulty for social media companies like Twitter is that not only is the occurrence of a so-called dogpile almost impossible to predict, but it is often unclear how or when moderators should react, and indeed what sort of action is appropriate. For some, the solution is both simple and severe. During a Reclaim the Internet conference, Labour MP Jess Phillips shared her view on what action she would like to see.
I would personally like to see further action of getting rid of people from these platforms who we know. This man has a brand. Him and other men's rights activists such as Nero have a brand that they use specifically for this abuse, and that brand matters to them because it makes them money, and actually we could really hurt them by damaging their brand, by taking it off air. And I understand the arguments for and against that sort of action. However, if this man was stood outside my house screaming at me and encouraging people to bring a crowd of people to also scream at me, he would be arrested, and so would all of the people who followed him. So there is, whilst I'm a defender of the freedom of speech, it is not the freedom to insult and silence people like me or like anyone who is suffering this sort of crime. My particular incident was around people saying that they would not rape me because I'm not good enough for a raping. That's for all you other women. You must be chuffed. So what happened to me was I had thousands and thousands of people telling me that I was not good enough for a roping.
I've examined the credibility of those allegations in some detail in an earlier video in this series. But today I want to focus on the complexity, and dare I say it, predictably disingenuous double standards that become apparent when you consider different perspectives on the same dogpiling incident. And I want to do this by taking a closer look at an incident that the Reclaim the Internet campaign have used as an example of abusive dogpiling in action. This relates to an incident in June 2015 when the second person named by Phillips in the previous clip was alleged to have been responsible for a dogpiling incident involving TV science educator Dr Emily Grossman. Here's Dr Grossman sharing her perspective on BBC Radio 4 Women's Hour.
So my kind of dogpiling, as you call it, which is exactly what happened to me, happened last summer when I went on national TV and spoke about sexism in science and encouraging more girls into science, and also emotional vulnerability and crying in science. And as Jess said, there was this huge amount of dogpiling. I got thousands and thousands of abusive tweets, comments through email, on YouTube, basically attacking me, undermining me as a woman, as a scientist, my credentials, and most disturbingly undermining women in general, the sort of condescension. Yes, there were sort of the odd comments, for me, not many, thankfully, about rape, some horrible anti-Semitic stuff, but actually what I found most disturbing was a low-lying, insidious misogyny and sexism that it's actually quite hard to quantify, it's quite hard to pin down, and when people say, oh, tell me what the comments were, some of them I just couldn't explain, but it just was this overwhelming feeling of just horribleness.
If you're unfamiliar with the debate that triggered the Twitter storm, then it's certainly worthwhile watching it for added context. I'll include a link to the clip uploaded by Sky News, which has now been watched by approximately 500,000 people on YouTube. But for now, suffice it to say that there is more to this story than someone being subjected to a barrage of hostility simply for daring to speak out about sexism in science. The following spring, Labour MP and former Shadow Minister for Crime Prevention Stella Creasy cited Grossman's experience when criticising police and tech firms for failing to tackle trolling. She used the incident as an example of why measures need to be taken to raise prosecution rates, cases of online abuse, using existing criminal law. It appeared to be a curious example to evoke in the context of calling for prosecutions, particularly given the amount of evidence available in the public domain by the time that Creasy made her comments. Indeed, at least 3 very thorough analyses of the messages sent to Dr Grossman via the very public open source platform of Twitter have been conducted, and none provide significantly convincing evidence of prosecutable offences. The first was commissioned by her debate partner Milo Yiannopoulos, in part because he was troubled by the potential guilt by association reputational damage that Grossman's claims could potentially and arguably did deliver to his doorstep. In his article, Why Do Feminists Cook Up Stories About Misogyny When They Lose Debates?, he wrote that it seemed highly unlikely to me that someone as distinguished as Grossman would simply concoct allegations for sympathy on social media because she felt unhappy about the way the debate had gone. I messaged Grossman asking her for examples of misogynistic tweets so I could name and shame the perpetrators. She declined to provide any. This is particularly weird because Grossman claims she retweeted the worst of the abuse, yet an inspection of her Twitter feed reveals little in the way of hateful invective. Yiannopoulos' conclusion was that there was evidence of a little trolling, some slight meanness and some obliging comments about her beauty, but no instances of outright misogyny. Ultimately, his conclusion was that she had cooked up the abuse narrative to deflect focus from her own disastrous debating performance. No matter how thinly you slice a thing, there will always be two sides. And I wouldn't entirely agree with Yiannopoulos' conclusion that there was no evidence of outright misogyny. Context, intent, and personal perception are all important factors to take into account in such matters. And it's not my intention to presume the impact that the incident had on Dr. Grossman's well-being. And I also think it is certainly fair to acknowledge that Dr. Grossman did receive a significant number of tweets in the immediate aftermath of her Sky News debate that could reasonably be considered as hostile. But everyone is entitled to their own perception, and in my humble subjective opinion, Dr. Grossman's own analysis of the evidence in support of her eyebrow-raising claims about a torrent of misogyny, more often than not, provide plenty of evidence to support the consensus conclusion of her critics that Dr. Grossman was feigning hypersensitivity and conflating a large volume of personal criticism into sexist and possibly even illegal online abuse. You can judge for yourself by conducting your own analysis of tweets to Dr. Grossman over the period, but you can also save yourself some time by considering Dr. Grossman's own presentation on the incident, where she breaks down the abusive comments into different categories and manifestations of misogyny. Once again, I'll include a link to the entire presentation, but here are a couple of examples to emphasise the point.
Then it comes to women being exemplified by me, being weak or pathetic for showing emotions, because I said that I cried when I came out of my exams, and for showing lack of confidence, because I said that I'd been put off in a male-dominated environment when I started a physics degree and ended up switching to biology because I was pretty much the only girl and I lost my confidence. Now, things like, she said girls are pussies and we should coddle their feelings. Women are so fucking sensitive. Society coddles females from birth, how much more nurturing and confidence boosting do they need? All we have to say is some sexist comments and they leave and get discouraged. Seems like an easy competitive edge to me. Women's confidence this, women's confidence this, women's confidence that. Women want to compete, but they don't know what that word actually means. She wants special emotional accommodations for women. She's a doctor but got mocked by a journalist in a simple debate. How can she expect to compete with a man who studied a subject for 20 years? Women don't want to perform to established standards, hence the whining and crying. Feminism is about lowering standards so women can meet them. If you're a woman in STEM, you're not advancing, you don't belong in STEM. It's not because of sexism. Why do we assume that STEM has to accommodate? Why does it have to change to accommodate women? Why can't women adjust to the environment? Because the environment is inherently fucked. Excuse me. Anti-Semitism, as Connie spoke about, attacks on race. So I got, the smattering of anti-Semitism, pretty disgusting stuff. Remember when Jews were smart? After seeing this video, I'm ashamed to be Jewish, and this, which I'm not even going to read out loud because it's got really awful Hitler cunt references in it. Absolutely disgusting. Feminists have a political agenda. We hate men. Ask her why she hates men. Did she have a rapey uncle? Daddy issues. Really, really distorted stuff. Do you want to pound the flesh over this for your political moral crusade? Talk about doing more harm than good. We reach for words such as abuse, harassment, and because I'd lost the argument, because I'd lost the debate. He basically silenced me, and so did the rest of the internet, because for the next 2 weeks, I believed him. I thought, oh my God, I've taken this too personally, this is a fault in me, and I can't now speak about this. And the rest of the internet then continued to agree with him. She's cried misogyny, she's asking, right out of the damsel in distress playbook. People saying, are you done pretending that you were harassed? Maybe you shouldn't be a public figure if you can't handle criticism. Can't take the heat, stay out of the kitchen. No, can't take the heat of criticism, she should stay in the kitchen, is actually what she wrote. Because she can't handle being an adult, because I've complained about it. Calm down, you'll get too excited and wet yourself. Find your big girl panties. Boo freaking who, if you can't stand the heat, get out of the debating kitchen. I smell something burning. That was me clearly martyring myself for a cause. Everybody to the kitchen. So for 2 weeks, I couldn't speak because I believed genuinely that all of this stuff was true and that somehow I'd got the wrong end of the stick and somehow I couldn't speak. And these friends and family giving me support through Facebook were saying, you're great, we love you, who cares?
If you're happy to accept the credibility of Dr. Grossman's claim about experiencing a torrent of misogynistic abuse, there remains the question of responsibility. And most specifically, the question of if the alleged perpetrator, in this case Yiannopoulos, can reasonably be perceived as responsible for the ensuing dogpile. In my humble subjective opinion, based on the evidence presented by Dr. Grossman, the answer is no.
As I was literally going home from the studio in the cab, I was on Twitter, and these tweets started to come in. And it's what Connie said about people like Milo, like Louise Mensch, who have a kind of following who they call upon. So basically, Milo called out his bloodhounds. And he hashtagged it, he got the video up online within an hour through Sky News, he was tweeting the video, and I thought, great, people can watch this, great. You know, naively I thought this was a good idea, which I still do think is a good idea, but there's been a tsunami in between.
A social media etiquette principle relevant to dogpiling is that popular public figures should be careful about criticising others, because if they have a large following, then their followers may start attacking the target of their criticism. This is fair enough as far as it's fair enough, but it seems unreasonable and unrealistic to accuse Yiannopoulos of incitement to harassment or setting the bloodhounds on her, as Grossman described it, simply for doing the exact same thing that both Sky News and Dr Grossman herself did after the debate, i.e. share the footage on Twitter. The allegation that some high-profile tweeters deliberately encourage their followers to attack their enemies is not entirely unrealistic, but it is also a muddled one. For example, Yiannopoulos was subsequently famously banned from Twitter the following year after he was judged to be somehow responsible for a series of racist tweets sent by other people to Hollywood movie star Leslie Jones. Twitter have never explained exactly why they judged him to be responsible, and Yiannopoulos has described the action as political, pointing out that no action was taken against Jones, who ironically has directly called on her followers to attack other users. Such allegations have led some high-profile social media commentators to include specific requests on their content, asking people not to contact anyone discussed in their critical analysis pieces. But realistically, any individual has only a limited scope of influence on the actions of other people. To put this into context, here's a clip of YouTuber Was Lee discussing this point in a reply video to a fellow YouTuber who, after lodging a dubious legal claim against Sargon of Akkad, suggested that he would be responsible if she subsequently received hostile or abusive messages from his followers about the lawsuit.
See, now, here's the thing. I could say to everyone watching this video right now, hey guys, don't contact this bitch, because that's exactly what she wants. She wants to be able to play the victim. And Sargon could say the same thing. Don't go and contact them. We don't want you to contact them. Nobody wants you to contact anyone that we make videos about. And to that end, you see people put these stupid fucking, like, disclaimers in the start of their video, like, oh, don't go and contact these people, like, as if that fucking means anything. Look, here's the reality of the situation. Akila, Christy, Anita Sarkeesian, whoever, any fucking SJW Fruit Loop who's watching this right now, waiting to try to blame somebody for the actions of somebody else, here's something to consider. You want to know how to get people to point out how you're an insufferable hypocrite who has no understanding of the values and principles they claim to hold? Just keep being you and doing what you do. Because you're the one who's responsible for the way people react to you, Akila. The shit that you say, the shit that you do, is the reason why people react to you in the way that they do. I could put a disclaimer at the start of this video. I could drone on for 10 minutes at the end of this video about how nobody should go after you and how nobody should send you a message and whatnot. But they're not going to give a fuck. You know why? Because if they want to say something to you, they will. And even if a disclaimer or me saying something could dissuade them from doing so, which it fucking wouldn't, I'm not in a position to tell them that they shouldn't do that. You know why? Because I'm doing that right now. Which for them would beg the question, well, why is it okay for me to give you shit and not them? So, I can't help you out, Akila. The only person who can help you out is you, but in order for you to help yourself, you'd have to stop being such a cunt. And call me crazy, I don't see that happening.
Which brings me to the massive double standard at the heart of this story, and the question of how much responsibility should Dr. Grossman herself take for the circumstances that led to her receiving a large amount of negativity on Twitter. Because the so-called dogpile that Dr. Grossman experienced followed her own personal and not entirely convincing contribution to an even larger dogpiling incident which had spilled off the pages of social media and into the national press and television, where people like Dr. Grossman rushed to judge and publicly shame a Nobel Prize-winning scientist based on the dubious claims of one journalist. I am, of course, talking about the distractingly sexy Tim Hunt kerfuffle.
I have no beef with him. I think it is a shame that he will be remembered for this and not for his work, because he was undoubtedly an unbelievable scientist. And I think it was more the point that this was going to happen at some point. It was inevitable. And it's just a shame that it happened to be him.
In the end, nearly 200,000 distractingly sexy messages were posted.
It was been very odd. Tim made what he thought was a self-deprecating joke. He stayed at this conference for another day and a half. One person mentioned it by chance, but nobody said they were offended by it. In the departure lounge, he realised he was suddenly in deep trouble because he was emailed an article to be published in the next day's Times, which was based on a tweet. He recorded a really rambling, unclear statement, sounding like he actually recommended single-sex laboratories. And that's nonsense for those of us who know him and the people, men and women, who've worked with him over the years. And the fallout from that programme and the whole incident has been really extraordinary.
Tim Hunt then offered a heartfelt apology to the conference organisers and publicly, but it wasn't quite enough. He didn't have a paid job to be fired from, but while on the plane home, he was asked to resign from his honorary position at the University College London. Resignations from the European Research Council and the Royal Society followed.
Well, good reporting doesn't just describe words that were said. It describes the context. It gives the right of reply. And so you can judge whether a statement, for instance, was intended as a joke or not. Whether it was accompanied by very positive statements about women scientists, which apparently it was. That seems to be the majority view now. I just became increasingly disturbed about that, not least because of the evidence that then emerged from all the young people who had worked in his lab and all of his collaborators, male and female, about the nature of the man himself. It looks as though he's a really decent bloke. So one has to distinguish the man and the word.
What we're witnessing, really, is a comment that would be perfectly unobjectionable if it were over the dinner table, or if it was, for example, your own granddad.
It wouldn't be unobjectionable if there were young girls present who were studying maths and science at school. And
Andrew Short has tweeted to say, is it because he's made these comments because, leaning to your point, because he's a septuagenarian and he's from a bygone era, sexism in the modern world has no place, but he is an old man, and so do we have to forgive him?
Of course, I'm not talking about him and his comments as him as a person. I'm talking about what it does in terms of the environment that we're bringing girls up into, and a responsibility that people in positions of authority like he is to actually not perpetuate these negative images about women. It's really damaging when girls do a maths test in an environment where they've been told that they're not going to be as good as girls. If they do a maths test in that environment and they identify themselves as girls, they actually write their name as female on the test, they won't do as well in that environment.
Yeah, but you see, you're conflating two different things.
It is the wider context of her contribution to the Tim Hunt witch hunt that makes Dr. Grossman's pleas to everyday sexism all the more unconvincing. Dr. Grossman is on record to admitting that she didn't have time to do any research before her appearance on Sky News, and that when she went on air, she didn't even know if Tim Hunt's comments were meant to be a joke or not. And no matter what you think about her debating partner's unique style, it's hard not to argue that it wasn't a devastatingly bad performance from Grossman. Her position was so ill thought out that as soon as her opponent began picking it apart with actual facts, for large parts of the segment, all she could do was sit there pouting at him, much to the amusement of many viewers. She entirely concurred with Tim Hunt's hardly earth-shattering observation that women do often cry in stressful situations, and remarkably even went as far as actually doing the actual thing that Tim Hunt had been wrongly accused of doing by arguing that in her experience women perform better in segregated environments. Different people will have different offence thresholds, and I would certainly accept that some comments in Grossman's Twitter timeline could reasonably be perceived by some as misogynistic or sexist, but based on her own evidence, Dr. Grossman's claims about a barrage of misogynistic abuse appear stunningly wide of the mark. And personally, I have been left unconvinced by Dr. Grossman's selectively low-level threshold when it comes to offensive statements. Interestingly, while her presentation to an exclusively feminist audience suggests Dr. Grossman has an extremely low offence threshold in general, she still manages to find it hilarious when someone in the audience suggests that the next time she debates Yiannopoulos, she should just bring a gun. Political correctness has its place in society and can be an important way of flagging up expressions that we don't realise can be genuinely hurtful to some people with backgrounds or beliefs that are different to our own. But while political correctness can be about etiquette and reasonable levels of politeness, increasingly it can also be weaponised in an effort to impose a political agenda on others by shutting down dissent or debate, or in this case, push responsibility for shortcomings onto others. It has been long since established that Hunt's remarks had been savagely wrenched from context, but Dr. Grossman has remained entirely unapologetic about her rush to judgment, arguing that, as a science educator and someone who inspires young people to follow careers in science, especially women, she believes that even as a joke, Tim Hunt's words were irresponsible because he was in a position of responsibility. But while Hunt has inspired the next generation of biologists in numerous ways, not least the aforementioned Nobel Prize, as some of her critics pointed out at the time, after completing her PhD, Dr. Grossman abandoned the cold, sterile environment of the laboratory to pursue a career in acting, and then television punditry, where she more often seems entirely at ease with mixing her passion for science education and undermining negative gender stereotypes with a bit of witty banter and the odd saucy joke or two. And with that thought in mind, I'll leave you with a clip of Dr. Grossman discussing science matters with comedians Jimmy Carr and Lee Mack.
Well, I think we need to go to experts on this.
We need to find out, verifiers.
No, it's not true that they will always be the same colour. However, it is quite likely that they will be a similar colour because they are both related to skin tone. The darker your skin tone, the more of the pigment cells that release melanin there are in the skin lip covering, so it masks the colour of the red blood vessels, so they look a little bit darker.
Sorry, can I just stop you? Are we going to see your nipples or not?
I was waiting for that.
Oh, no, Dr. Emily Grossman.
What I was going to say, though, is that it's different. The way that the nipples are coloured is different to the lip tone because that's due to the balance of two different pigments, and the balance of those is controlled by your genes. But the darker your skin, the more likely you have a higher level of the brown one, giving you more brown nipples, and the paler your skin, you've got a higher level of the red one, giving you pinker nipples.
The big question is there any truth in this?
Well, in general, yes. The paler your skin tone, the lighter, paler pink your lips and your nipples. So, yes, kind of true, but there's huge variation. And, in fact, your nipples can even change colour during your lifetime. So
whoa. How extreme can this change be? I mean, from what to what?
Well, from sort of pink to brown.
Oh, they can't do the full traffic lights. That would be good, wouldn't it, if a bloke was touching up a woman and it went from green to red. Oh, it's got amber. She needs a minute to herself.
Yeah, time out.
Let's go to a panel of experts. Can men lactate?
Maybe if their hormones are slightly imbalanced, so they've got a higher level
It might have been a woman with really small tits. Honestly, men have been known... It's a freak...
Hang on,
men have been known... All right, then what are nipples for?
What are nipples for?
I don't know. I asked you first.
Why is it when you touch a lady's boob, in your mind it goes... Why is that? From a scientific point of view.
Well, actually,
What's making that noise in your head when you touch a boob?
Jimmy, I'm even more childish than you. When I touch a lady's boob, it actually does make that noise because I've got a horn in my pocket.
Can't you see it too? There's an elephant in the room.